And we're here on Liquid Lunch. It's me, Hugh. Sandra's here. It's Wednesday today, Sandra.
March
30th.
One more day in March.
Yeah, one more day.
Wow, and then
it's April.
April Fools.
Which is also Lalo's birthday, but that's another story. At least she says
that's a beautiful day to be born.
Yeah, I guess.
It is, actually. You have to have a good sense of humor if you're born April 1st.
Yeah, because, But let's get busy. We got phil-pendry here. We're very glad to have him in here, and we've already been having a great conversation.
Yeah, we've unofficially started the interview.
So, Phil.
Yes.
So what can we say? You've been doing, I guess you're a filmmaker, right?
That's why he's named Phil.
Cinematographer and director.
And you've been doing news stories since, I've got your...
since I was 14 years old.
And what year was that?
1942, because during the war in England, we lived near Denham Studios, and instead of going to school, I used to watch them making movies. And there was a shortage of men because everybody was called up in the army.
Right.
And when I was 14 and a half, they came up to me, and I was watching them instead of going to school. He says, "Do you want a job?" Because I was watching them make The Thief of Baghdad. And I said, yes. They said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I'd like to be on the cameras." And they said, yeah. He gave me a union card, and at 14 and a half, I started in the movie business.
Wow.
And then but when I was 17, I got called up into the army.
That would have been what, 45?
44, 45 years.
So that was pretty good timing.
Just at the end of the war, yes.
Yeah.
And since they, when I joined the army, they had seen I'd been not a cameraman then, just an assistant. I was a clapper boy, 348 take one.
Okay.
So they gave me a camera, and my first job with the Allied War Crimes Commission. We went round at the end of the war, all the concentration camps, looking for Allied prisoners of war that had been put into concentration camps and that had escaped, and instead of going back to POW camps, they'd put them into concentration camps and died. So the Nuremberg trials, they were going to kind of get them on the Geneva Convention, which was ridiculous. I mean, how many troops are we talking about? Maybe 300 to 400 maximum, right? Mm-hmm. But never mind the 6 million other people that were killed. And we went around the camps looking for them, and that was to say horrific, because I was totally embarrassed by it. You stand there, and you're in a camp, and these people are coming up to you. And so what you do is you use the camera as a barrier between you and reality. And this is very important when you're covering a conflict or covering anything. The camera acts as a barrier between you and what's actually happening. So you can photograph something that's really bloody, but when you put the camera down, that's reality. When you put the camera back up, you've anesthetized your visual perception with the camera. Now, unfortunately, we've done that with the general public. I think the public have been anesthetized with so much violence that today we accept all kinds of other violence. We've anesthetized the visual perception of the public with the amount of violence that we show on television.
But, so there's a lot to unpack from what you just said there.
Yes.
I wonder, I was just going to ask you, when you were in the concentration camp, so these were the prisoners that were coming up to you that were...
Well, no, they were there.
Yeah.
And we were in the camps, but you felt embarrassed because you were well-dressed, you were fed.
You were privileged.
You were very privileged, yes. And this, to me, was, it's like being on the stage and performing, and then you're looking at the audience and they're all applauding at you, but they're there, right? It's the only one situation where I was very much overcome with the situation.
And you would have been 17, 18 at the time?
17, yeah. Of course, we were conscripted then, everybody.
But were you there as a soldier?
Oh, yes, I was a sergeant.
Oh, okay. So
I was a sergeant with the Allied War Crimes Commission.
But the war was over now, and you guys
It was about the last 2 days of it.
Okay. So were you, I mean, there's some of that, it's famous concentration camp footage, right? Did you shoot some of that?
No. Mine, I was stills then. They saw I'd been a cameraman, so they gave me a still camera.
Right.
I worked with a pathologist.
Okay.
We had to go around and dig these people up and see how they were murdered and how...
Did anybody ask you for help?
Did
any of these prisoners ask you for help? I know.
No. The biggest mistake that was made when the troops first went in, they fed them, which was...
You don't do that.
Oh.
No, that was one of the big mistakes.
Why?
You got to do it slowly.
Oh,
right?
Because they had not had any food, and they all had light. I mean, it was a really embarrassing situation for a Westerner to be in, or at least I felt it was for me.
So when did you first notice that the act of putting a camera up insulated you from all that?
I've covered approximately between 30 and 40 conflicts: Vietnam, the Congo, Iraq, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, you name it, right? And when you're covering these things, you use the camera as a shield between you and reality. I mean, look at the people that stop and look at an accident on the road now, right? And then they all put their little iPhones up. Well, that divorces them from the situation kind of business.
It's interesting. When you say you were embarrassed, and you're using that word a lot, in what way were you embarrassed? Because you were on one side?
Because you were so privileged, and there were these,
So were you embarrassed personally, Phil, or as a country?
No, I was embarrassed personally.
Okay.
That's the only time that I've ever been, in that situation. The rest of the time, covering wars, you just have to use the camera, whether in the Congo or whether you're in... Mind you, you can run into what I call amusing situations.
Okay.
We used to cover Northern Ireland quite a lot, which was a terrible conflict between Protestant and Catholic. And I've always said that in Londonderry you could take the camera out, switch your light on, and you'd get a disturbance because they were looking to... Now, the thing was, why were there no riots between 6 and 6:30? Because the obbos that had been throwing the stones at the British soldiers would go to watch themselves on television news, and they'd come back to get on the 11 o'clock news.
Okay.
So I did make this point. I won an award for a film I shot in Ireland, and when I came back to Canada, the newspapers interviewed me, and I said, well, I think sometimes the cameras are the cause of the situation, because they used to come up to me while I was shooting, and if I had a minder who was with me, and they'd say, are you Protestant or Catholic? And because you never knew quite who you were talking to.
You don't know what the right answer is,
right?
You
don't know what the right answer is. You just say, oh, I'm an atheist. Are you a Catholic atheist or Protestant atheist? So that would kind of get rid of the situation. But when I came back to get the award, I did a newspaper article in which I said that the cameras can cause a situation. It's because people are looking to get on camera to make their statements, right? And of course, the radio and newspaper people latched onto it, and they said, that's what we've always said. Television, their radio and newspapers, they're the cause of it. CBC got very mad at me for saying this, because then they got accused, right? And they said, well, I was freelance, and they said, that's it, we're finished with you. I said, okay, big deal. Marshall McLuhan read the story, phoned up the CBC and said, I'm interested in what this man has to say. CBC did a 180-degree turn, because they had said... He said, would I come and have lunch at the University of Toronto? I said, yes. And I spent an hour and a half with him, and he wanted me to write something like 30,000 words. And I said, well, I'm basically illiterate because I didn't go to school, right? But I listened to McLuhan for about an hour, and the majority of it just went.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a lot, some time to sink in for that McLuhan stuff. But I want to kind of probe you like McLuhan would right now. Oh, wait, I'm getting a phone call, Phil.
Somebody else wants to ask you a question.
All this media. But I want to ask you, because you mentioned that the act of putting the camera up anesthetizes you from the situation.
From the reality.
And then you mentioned that maybe that's doing it to our whole society. Mm-hmm. Now, what I kind of look at it, and I think that the television, okay, which is how most of us have gotten the camera, or the living in the environment where cameras are kind of ubiquitous, has held up a mirror to society. It's almost like unless it was on TV, it was like TV kind of had to redo everything that people had experienced. Now, unless it was now shown on TV, it was like a new thing. I mean, even now, it's like when I'm watching the Weather Channel, they go, hey, it's cold outside, kids. Don't forget to put on a warm coat. Like, I don't need some weatherman to tell me that, Yeah. It's like, but it's holding this mirror up to society. And I think, I could, maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is that there's less violence on the streets today than there might have been 50, 60 years ago, in Toronto, for example.
Possibly, yes. But we've become...
Maybe.
Anesthetized to violence, I think, in a sense.
But not to real violence. I mean, most people really don't want to get involved in real violence, right? Because maybe I'm almost thinking that TV makes it so horrific that they don't want to experience it in real life because they've seen enough of it on TV.
Or is it less violent? Are you seeing less violence because your standard has lowered and it's not deemed as violent anymore?
Good question, Sandra.
Yeah, it's possible.
I don't know, Phil.
It's possible.
What I wonder is, you put this camera in front of you and you say that the shield goes up. And so it's almost like a psychological barrier as well, correct? Yes. Did you ever have to deal with post-traumatic stress when you came back? Because I can imagine.
No, because I looked on wars as the theater of the macabre. I mean, they really were. If you ever covered, Vietnam was the literal theater of the macabre. You have to have a sense of humor all the time. Now, that's important. I mean, I've covered 30, 40 wars, and somebody said, well, why don't you have, what's it called?
PTSD.
PTSD.
Yeah.
Well, that's because I've looked on these conflicts, as I say, they are macabre. They are not real, right? War, unfortunately, in my opinion, is just part of human nature. I mean, we've been warring with each other for so many years that it's become... look at America today. We've, in my lifetime, they've always had some kind of war to keep the industrial complex going, right? So it's been in the World War II, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Iraq, you name it. There's always been some kind of war going on.
So do you think that will always be, Phil? You think it will never stop? Do you think we'll ever reach a level where we'll say, okay, enough? I mean, I'm trying to do a documentary at the moment called In Search of God, in which I maintain that everybody has God on their side. I mean, you cover the Irish, Protestant versus Catholic, same God. You look at every American coin, what does it say on it? In God we trust?
Yes. ISIS believes in God. The Germans, during World War II, had to swear, every soldier and civil servant had to swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler. The opening line of their allegiance is not to Hitler, it's to God. So they had, the Germans firmly had God on their side.
Or so they believed.
Well, yes, it wasn't an unreligious country, right? They really had God on their side. And so do the Americans, and so does ISIS have God on their side. And if you cover any wars, Cyprus, Turks, Cypriots, Muslims against Greek Cypriot Christians, right? Every war I've covered has, I mean, way back since Henry VI was it, in his charge, here's for God and England, kind of. And we're trying to interview American down at West Point, the ministers. We want to interview all the religious leaders, and Toronto is a good place to find them because there is every religion in the world in Toronto. So Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Hindu, you name it. But they've all had this firm belief that God is on their side.
So you're writing a book called...
No, we're trying to do a documentary on it.
Okay. And so really, and the point of the documentary is that underneath the war, it's all the same? We're all fighting for the same reason?
Well, they've all got God on their side. I mean, about 20 years ago, I did a one for TV Ontario called In Search of God.
Okay.
But we traveled to Israel and Los Angeles and Boston. But that was for the Jewish religion. That wasn't for... all religions.
Right.
So in this case, we want to look at it from a different point of view. We want to encase all the religions who firmly believe that God is on their side. And then when they go into battle, look at the shots of the chaplains blessing the troops.
We just had a guy on the show like a couple of weeks ago who's actually speaking to God, and God's answering back on a day-to-day basis.
Like Conversations with God with Neil Donald Walsh kind of thing?
Kind of similar idea, but this guy, I'm not sure how sincere Neil Donald Walsh is, but this guy was really sincere.
Oh, yes, of course. They are all sincere. I mean, look at the Irish one, 400 years of Protestant and Catholic fighting each other. I mean, that's one of the longest battles that has been going on.
And it's still going on?
Well, slightly, yes.
Just a little bit, I think, right?
It's very difficult because Canada took in a whole bunch of Catholic and Protestant children to get them away from the war and brought them to Canada. And they all got on very, very well together. And then they sent them back to Ireland. We went back 5 years later, and all the friendliness that they developed in Canada disappeared when they went back because they learned it from their parents. It was passed down from one generation to the other.
Is it still going on then today or no?
Yes. Well, the IRA just had a big... they had a thing in Dublin, right? I mean, that's been going on. The Turkish and Cypriot thing will eventually be solved, right? Whether we'll ever solve the thing between the West and so-called Christianity and Muslims, who both firmly believe that God is on their side.
Well, that's getting increasingly complex now with, large numbers of Muslims moving into Western Europe, right? I mean, it's more complicated than just religion. It's cultural, and it's in Europe, of course. Unlike Canada, you've got those cultures that have been there forever.
Yes.
And now they're dealing with this influx. In Canada, we're all new, right? So it's a little easier to deal with.
We're all
here.
Immigrants.
Yeah. At least easier for us. I mean,
But it's an interesting observation, though, that those kids were fine here, and then they go back, and they revert right back because of the influence of the parents.
So they reverted back because they got the input from their parents, right?
Now, that's a real statement on the programming, though, and the brainwashing.
It's very difficult to
break.
Yeah.
Now, we can't keep this interview going forever because we have more guests and stuff. But Phil, while we've got you here, let's talk a little bit about your experience with Yoko Ono.
Oh, I first met her in 1962 when I was stationed in Tokyo.
Now, how did you meet her?
I went to rent her apartment.
Oh, she had an ad in the paper?
I forget.
I somehow think it wasn't an ad in the paper.
No, she wasn't married to John Lennon. She was married to a man called Foxy Cox. And
who's that?
Well, that was her husband at the time.
Was he in media?
No. We had a nickname for him. But,
all right. So she was renting an apartment.
Yes. So that's how I got to know her in Vietnam. I mean, in Tokyo. Then we both went back to London.
Okay.
And we redid our kinship there. And she had always said to me that, when people moon people with their bottoms,
right?
She thought people had that was one way of showing your respect or disrespect for what was going on. And she said she always wanted to make a film by showing people's rear ends.
Now, we do have some of that on film. Let's just keep talking, but maybe show some of the film while we're doing that. And I guess this is a famous film. You say everybody.
It's called Film Number 4.
Yeah, and you're saying that people in film school.
Four by Yoko Ono.
Here we go. So you were on the camera here? Or?
Now, listen, we made the original film, and it was bought by a Greek company who made it into 35. This film was shot after mine because Yoko lost the rights to it, right?
Oh.
Now, is this...
Oh, Anthony Cox, that's the name, yes.
Oh.
Anthony Cox.
Did we see your name there?
No, because this film was shot after mine. Oh, that's all it was. So you couldn't tell whether it was male or female. We put an advertisement in the London Times for people to come and have their bottoms photographed.
Those were the good old days, right, Phil?
And 1,000 people turned up.
Really?
Yes.
To show their bottom.
That's right.
Hugh, would you stand in line to do that? Because it must have been a lineup. Did you have to stand bottomless and line up?
No, what we did was we tried filming it by tracking, right? And it didn't work. So we got a thing that they stand on, and they walked, and they had their hands on a bar, and the camera was actually shot on a 16mm Bolex, just one lamp. It was very crude.
Well, that's pretty fitting, actually.
And we interviewed everybody and gave everybody not a title, but we use their voiceover on it anyway. But
and it's a famous film.
I want to know. Did people have to sign a release form?
No. We didn't bother with releases. If you're coming to take your trousers down or lift your skirt up, a release is the last thing.
Okay. I mean, would you recognize your own butt? I don't know.
No, of course not.
I have a feeling some people would.
I think.
No, you couldn't tell whether that was male or female, could you?
I could.
This is true.
You could?
I would love for you to do a test and have it, an audience and say, okay, number one, and then people write male or female, and then mark it afterwards.
You couldn't. No, we were very careful in what we shot. So you saw 4 pieces of flesh. It was meant to be something like the Andy Warhol film. It was meant to be.
But was this after Warhol then?
Before Warhol.
Before, so.
Yes.
Right,
wow.
now.
So I'm explaining the kind of genre that these films were made under, right?
That was in the heyday of the pop art.
That's right. Yes, yeah.
Now, what you were telling us before that at one point you were in Moscow during the Soviet period.
Yes, and they came up, we were filming in the school that trains cameramen, and they said, we know your name. And I said, how come? And they said, well, we used to show Film Number 4 as the epitome of Western decadence. And that was it. And so I'm famous for Western decadence, if nothing
that's
else.
What I wanted to ask.
Well, no, that's embarrassing. I'm kidding.
Why?
What's more embarrassing, that or what you were talking about earlier?
So what do you, that's quite an accusation. And what does that mean in terms of, is it Western decadence? What does that mean, Western decadence?
Oh, God knows what the communists thought was Western decadence. They were the past masters at that kind of publicity, if you want to call it, of using film and for propaganda purposes. It was propaganda, right?
Well, they liked the Nazis because the Nazis also, they tried to certain kinds of art forms were frowned upon, like abstract art.
Well, in my terms, Dr. Joseph Goebbels was the beginner of what he was called the mother of Madison Avenue. He used film and in such a way that turned the German public against the Jews. He used it very successfully. He was really a past master. He was one of the great masters of propaganda.
Well, and what about that Leni Riefenstahl, the filmmaker?
The woman.
Yeah.
Yes, well, that's different. I mean, she made that brilliant film on the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
But Goebbels himself was the past master, and the Russians also. Now, Western nations didn't use film for that kind of propaganda. The only reason that we used it, the Americans or the British, was to rally around the flag. It was patriotism, right? Let's go to war. Let's fight the Japanese. Let's fight the Germans. It was all that kind of propaganda. The Germans and the Russians used their propaganda in a much different way. And as I say, Goebbels was really the past master. I mean, he basically turned the German population against the Jewish population. They were not against it. They were ambivalent, but he was a past master of using film. He used it in the newsreels to begin with, right?
It's almost like the Nazis and the Russians had this real top-down.
Well, they learned from each other.
Yeah.
There's a marvelous book came out called The Relationship Between Moscow and Berlin. They reckon that they learnt off each other for extermination.
Now, they're not doing that in the West, right? I mean, we still have this idea that we can't have culture dictated from the top down.
Right. Yes.
But on the other hand, we do use it in advertising as
of
kind
course.
of commercial propaganda.
Yes, in every way.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, what do you think of that as a filmmaker? Are you are you involved in that?
What, in commercials? Yes.
Well, yeah.
I've done the top line for General Motors. I mean, I worked for them for a very short time, for about 2 years. I left the business and I started working for General Motors through Gabor Communications on a thing called La Auto. We made a bi-weekly reel for television showing we could shoot any story in Ontario that had a connection to General Motors. There isn't anything that happened in the 80s and 90s that General Motors didn't have an attachment to. And it was amazing. If they had a problem, their idea of covering up a problem was to shovel money on it.
That's the idea of crisis management.
Pardon?
That's crisis management.
Yeah, that's crisis management, yes.
Okay, we're just about out of time, Phil.
I have a question,
but I still want to ask him another question, too, but go.
Okay, so we're going to compete for asking you questions.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask was, I mean, you've been in this business for so long. You have, I'm sure, seen changes not only in the technology, but also in the perception of the media and the integrity of it. And would you say, first of all, that the integrity has gone down? Because I know in journalism it has, but from a cameraman perspective, has integrity gone?
Everybody's a camera person, not a cameraman.
Camera person. So
everybody's got one of these.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they become producers, directors. During the Olympics in England, they made a thing to shoot the best documentary. It was won by a Japanese who shot it all on an iPhone.
You know, Phil, mine's 4K. Did you know that?
Oh, yes, 4K. I mean, I can shoot a feature film on this.
It's nuts.
And does that scare you?
No, not particularly. I mean, but everybody becomes a reporter of some kind or other, whereas before we relied on the newspapers and the television to report. Now it's instantaneous. Now the internet, of course, has taken over. Forget television, right?
But you know, now I think it's like because everybody can do this, the value of all that stuff being shot is going down. It's like, how about experiencing it? Forget about having it on film. Like, I'm experiencing it. It's part of my personal, my life, right? Rather than, as you say,
and you never know what's the truth, because now with this and a computer, I can shoot a situation, take it to a computer and alter it completely.
Yes, and make it look like something completely different.
And I can make it look like something completely different. Yeah. Whether or not the public are going to believe it or not is another question.
Okay, Phil, one more question, and that is that because you knew Yoko Ono personally, because a lot of people, some people actually say that she was John Lennon's handler. You know, that the Beatles...
No, untrue.
Untrue.
I think Yoko Ono, you know, they had an exhibition of all her paintings and things at the museum a few years ago. She's a great original artist, very, very good one. Being married to John Lennon is like being married to Jesus Christ. Any hope of being recognized in your own field, forget it. She is one of the original artists, and she's very good at it. She has a lot of works. I have a couple of her things. She did a thing in England called cut it in half and paint it white. That was everyday objects cut in half, and that's where John met her at an exhibition that she gave. And I have of course, everybody says, well, her art is original. I have about this wide and about 4 feet long, a piece of plexiglass. It's absolutely plain. It's about 4 feet by 3 feet, and you can hang it up, and it's clear. It's about this thick. But written on the bottom is a picture to let the evening light go through. And everybody sees and says, I could have done that. I said, yes, but why didn't you?
Yeah, and it's when you did it too, right?
It's when we did it, yeah.
Now, are you still in touch with her today?
Occasionally, yes.
Is she doing shows today?
As a singer...
retired? You didn't see that. No, we didn't see that.
We won't go into that. But,
I meant art.
As an artist, she's a very good original artist.
Is she doing galleries?
Yes, well, she got some job in England of an art director somewhere or other. So she's, as I say, if you're married to John Lennon, your chance of being recognized yourself is difficult.
You're always in the shadow.
I think that's a really good point. So she wasn't his handler for MK Ultra purposes?
No, and I don't think she was the cause of the breakup of the Beatles either.
No.
I've not heard that. That's first. Wow.
And Paul McCartney? He's the real Paul McCartney?
The only one I met was John.
Okay. All right. Phil, this has been great. Thanks for doing this. I know we could stay here all day and just hear some more great stories, but thanks for doing it.
Thank you so much. I hope this is one of the interviews you remember.
Yes, I hope so anyway. Hope you get some phone calls.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here on Liquid Lunch. We'll be back with more right after this. ThatChannel.com.